This is The Payoff with me, Sylvia Jeffries, thanks to Belong Internet and UniSuper. Allegra Spender, welcome to The Payoff.
Thank you so much for having me.
We really appreciate you giving us some time today, especially on the verge of a federal election. And there's a lot that we can talk to you about beyond housing, beyond energy and the policies that will be up for debate at this election and what people will be voting for, as well as your personal life and where you've come from and your own history as well in your own career. But I'd like to begin on the generational wealth gap.
Yeah.
This is something I've heard you speak often and passionately about. Can you give us a sense of what the generational wealth gap looks like today?
Yeah. Look, I'll give you an example, some stories and then some stats. I had a young man come into my office and he said, look, I thought I was doing everything right. I studied hard at school. I went to uni. I got a good degree. I got a 50,000 HECS debt and I don't know if I'll ever have the same life that my parents did and ever be able to buy a home. You know, I went to a fintech startup, like, you know, it's a place where, you know, people are doing really well. These people in their late 20s and early 30s, they are well paid. And again, it was that same story, that sense that almost they'd given up, I think, on having the sort of I guess the financial milestones that their parents did, but that it was also affecting their decisions, like, you know, when to have kids, if to have another child. And so this is what I hear, but then the reality is borne out in the numbers. You see that, for instance, in housing, Sydney is the second least affordable place to live from a home ownership renting situation in the world. Second least affordable. You see that there's now 20 percentage points drop in home ownership for 30 to 34-year-olds now compared to a generation ago. And you see that from a wealth point of view, the wealth of the generation over 65s has grown about 50% in the last sort of 10 odd years. The wealth of households under the age of 35 has pretty much flatlined. So what you're seeing is parts of society are separating in terms of, you know, where you know, their ability to buy and achieve milestones, and some of that, and a significant proportion of that, is generational. It's very tied to housing, but it is also tied to our tax system and our sort of reliance on young working people to pay a lot of our taxes, which is a real problem when they can't get ahead. So for me, I guess I'm the daughter of someone who, you know, came to Australia with nothing and was able to build a really good life. And for me, this is why I'm so passionate about it. I want this country to continue to be a place where it doesn't matter who your parents are. You know, if you make good choices, if you work hard, whether you're the CEO, whether you're a retail worker, you have a chance just to, you know, do what your parents did, which is raise some kids, have a good life. That's what people really want.
Well, your late wonderful mother, Carla Zampatti, of course, is, you know, one of the great immigrant success stories in Australia, particularly, of course, in Australian fashion. I'd love to ask you a bit more about her a bit later on. But if we can just drill down on that a little bit more, in terms of buying a house today, I think there's a pretty strong narrative among some people out there that younger generations are not good with their money, that they blow it all on overseas trips and avocado toast.
It's completely untrue. Actually, the data shows that younger Australians are spending less on non-essentials, like, you know, avocado toast and overseas trips, compared to previous generations. Because it is tougher, they are spending more on the essentials, including things like rent. So this is a narrative. It's untrue and it's really unfair on younger Australians, because the ones that I talk to, and I talk to so many, you know, as a young man came up to me at King's Cross Station the other day. He said, "I've got a great job. My partner's got a great job. I just don't have the bank of mum and dad." And that's a real sense that if you don't have family backing, it is so hard right now. And in a way, it didn't used to be.
It is such an emotive topic, because if you look at the previous generations, I mean, I look at my mum, I look at my husband's mum, they both worked their backsides off, right?
They did.
On really modest salaries, really modest earnings. They lived within their means. They provided for us. They kept a roof over our heads.
Yeah.
We never had any luxuries, but we had every opportunity. We had everything we needed. So they scrimped and saved. And, you know, my mum has set herself up now for a comfortable retirement by being really frugal throughout her life. And that's a credit to her.
Absolutely,
for doing
100%.
That. When you look at how hard it is to get into the property market now, though, compared to, say, 40 years ago, what does that look like?
It is really fundamentally different for young Australians. And you see this, look at the last 20 years. House prices have gone up 4 times. Wages have gone up 2 times. That tells you everything you need about need to know about why it's so difficult right now, because people are working hard. Young Australians, they do work hard. We have actually really low youth unemployment. Young people are really, they're in jobs, but they just can't get ahead in the same way as previous generations. And I have to say, credit to your mum and credit to my mum. This isn't about saying, no, anybody else didn't earn it, didn't try. They did. I've seen that. I see that in my parents-in-law as well. But it is about saying we need to be honest that I think that young people are facing quite difficult circumstances right now. And I think it's up to all of us to work out how can we help them? How can we better set ourselves up? Because it's both, I think there's a moral duty and there's also sort of just a responsibility, I think, as every generation needs to leave the generation after them the better off.
Yeah.
And I think, there's a little bit of danger that we're not actually going to do it this time.
It seems pretty certain that we're not. How is the system stacked against young people as you see it?
Look, I think I would say a lot of this is non-deliberate stacking, if you know what I mean. I don't think anyone set out there and said, hey, let's make it harder for young Australians. But what I think is I think we've had a housing system that has, wanted the prices of everybody's house to go up and has banked on that. And so we've ended up in a situation where we don't have enough supply of housing to make housing more affordable. And, you look at some really good stats on this. Australia has around 400 dwellings per 1,000 people. Countries like France have around 600 dwellings per 1,000 people. If we were sort of OECD average, we would have, I think, at least a 1.5 million more homes.
Wow.
And so you can see also, if you look at the sort of stats on this, countries like Australia with low numbers of dwellings have higher house prices relative to income. And so this is why actually supply of housing is really critical to the question of people being able to afford housing. And that is why we need every policy really aligned to driving supply, and that we have to be thoughtful and be careful that, we don't get excited by things like first homeowners grants and stuff like that, which seemed like they were really good ideas. They seemed that they were helping, but they weren't getting to the nub of the issue, which is really that we do need to build greater supply. So I think that's, so some of the stark indicators, I think, of where some of the challenges are.
So the Albanese government heading into the election has got this housing fund, this future fund, to build with the aim of building 1.2 million homes. As we know, anyone who's ever applied for anything through council, it can take a long time. So this relies on councils, on state governments as well, everyone working together.
Yeah.
Do you see that plan as mission impossible, or is it practical?
Look, I think it has to be our aspiration. I'll be honest. I think we're not on track to achieve it, but I think we need to have an ambitious target in terms of building those houses, because that is our best security. It's our best chance of giving our younger generation the chance to buy their own homes and set themselves up. So I think, we need to be pulling all stops. And you're absolutely right that this is a state, federal and local government issue. So, the government has done some good things in terms of trying to put in incentives around states and local governments to act. I want those incentives sharpened. I actually also support where some of the opposition's gone in terms of some of their housing policies. And the point I'm going to make on housing is that this isn't a time for it's yours or yours. I think this is, domestically, is probably the biggest economic issue we face. This is a time for all good ideas are welcome here, because we need to build that level of housing, and we need to have the whole country backing that. We need the migration system to work to support that. We need the unions and the sort of industrial relations system to work to support that. So we need to be all in on trying to build these houses.
And it's not just first home buyers who we have to keep in mind here, it's renters.
Absolutely.
And the rental market is so tough right now. We're seeing an increase in homelessness. We know that women aged over 55 are the most likely to slip into homelessness at this stage as well. I mean, I'm from Brisbane. I've seen an increase in tents in places where they weren't in the past. It's a very real issue. Of course, the Greens have been, I think, pretty effective on this issue with young people in raising things like rental caps. I've also heard mooted incentives for landlords to provide long-term tenancy as well. Where do you stand on rental issues and how we can improve the situation, the landscape for renters?
Look, to talk to rental caps, it's a policy, again, that sounds good, but unfortunately, when you look at the evidence around the world, it doesn't end up delivering what you need, which is actually supply. You know, you end up with some people who are protected because they get a nice low rent, and others, if you're not lucky enough to get one of those places, you know, you're really on the cold. And people also don't invest in rental properties, and there are other sort of unintended consequences there. So, you know, while I think the Greens have identified it's a problem, I don't think that solution is actually really, unfortunately, what we need. In terms of rental protections, I think you're right, however, to say that we do need rental protections for renters. The New South Wales government has finally introduced sort of the to end to no-fault evictions, and that's a real fundamental support for people because, people don't... are very afraid, frankly, of speaking up, about a problem in their property because they're scared they're going to get chucked out or that their landlord's going to really up the rent. And so this provides some basis of protection. But a big area for me is about how do we increase the term of leases. Talking to a lot of renters, including a family recently, people want a bit of certainty. They want to know that, okay, that they can stay here for a couple of years, that they're going to have, that if they've got young kids, that they can still stick in their school or their childcare. And so we do need longer term leases. That is why I worked on the sort of build to rent bill that has passed through Parliament and worked with people like the Property Council and people like Shelter to increase both the affordable rental part but also the length of leases up to 5 years, because that's what people are telling me they want as renters. They want more certainty.
Well, if they're not going to own a home, we have to provide a system that provides for long-term renters.
Absolutely. And I think that's a real challenge sometimes for the mum and dad sort of investors, because if it's your only property, you may want to, your own personal circumstances may change. And so, you might not be able to give that renter the certainty that they may want. And that is, I think, why there's a value in having some of these build-to-rent organisations as well.
So beyond property and perhaps more specifically tax reform, which kind of applies to both, what exactly do you want to be on the table when it comes to tax reform? What do you want to be up for discussion?
Look, I've been someone who really talks about tax and really proud to talk about tax. Well, but most people I know sort of go, oh God, don't talk to me about tax.
Don't touch negative gear. Don't touch franking credits.
Don't touch anything. And also people on the street that I talk to, are a bit nervous about talking about tax. I think we all feel like we're not qualified. Yeah. But I think it's important because when I look at the big economic issues I think facing the country, which I think are, one, the intergenerational inequity and just young people getting ahead. Secondly, low productivity of our businesses, because that really drives wages, it drives our standard of living. And finally, the energy transition. Tax plays into all of them, so you just can't ignore it. You can't leave it on the sidelines. So I did a tax green paper, and one of the big things to come out of that was a real sense of I believe very strongly, we need to lower our burden on income tax as a major source of revenue. So Australia collects more from income tax, more from people's wages as a tax source compared to many of our other OECD countries. And the challenge on that is that tax falls to younger working people typically. And those are the same people who are struggling to get ahead. And also, what we're seeing is because our population is ageing, we've also got fewer of those younger working people compared to some of our older people than we used to. And I just don't think we can continue just to rely on a shrinking source of the population who are themselves struggling to get ahead to increase our tax base. So I think we need to make some strong steps to reduce our focus on that part of that part of the economy to provide our tax base. Income tax is always going to be important, but just not so much.
I think a lot of people would be happy to hear that. However, I wonder if we can afford that when you look at the size of the deficit at the moment, which is a massive debt, which will play out for generations to come potentially.
Look, I think it's a very fair question. And so my point on and how I've been approaching tax is to say, look, this isn't just saying, oh, you know, cut taxes and you sort of cut services. It's to say, okay, well, let's start from the basis that we keep our tax take the same. You know, I think everyone would like to cut taxes if we can, but services are super important. But let's start from the basis that the tax, you know, keep the tax set level the same, but could we change the tax mix to better support, one, home ownership, and second, younger generations? And specifically, one of the things I have been advocating for is an end to bracket creep, which is about indexing tax thresholds, which, again, it's one of those terms that gets thrown around. Lots of people don't necessarily know how it works, but what it does mean is because our tax thresholds aren't indexed, sometimes people end up paying more tax without actually realising. It's a way that your tax increases in relation to your income.
Of the policies that have been mooted so far, of the promises that have been made so far in this campaign, as we record this, it's not officially an election campaign yet, but it certainly feels like one.
Certainly feels like
has felt like one for a while already.
Yeah.
Of those that have been promised so far, what do you think is most promising for young Australians?
Oh, that's a very good question. Oh. I'll be honest, I don't think it's enough. So what I would say, the truth of it is that I think there are elements of what individual major parties are doing which are good, but I don't think they are doing enough to address the challenges of young Australians. And this is and I think neither of them are at this stage are saying they're willing to look at tax, and I think that's pretty fundamental. So I think we have to look at tax, and we need to look at income tax, and we need to look at how to stop relying on it so much. And so until we start to deal with that, then, I don't think enough is on the table. In relation to housing, as I said, look, I do support bits of what both the major parties are putting forward on housing, but I think we have to it's not sort of this or this. It has got to be, it's actually got to be this and this. So as we need to support, say, those greater incentives to put in sewerage, put in some of the infrastructure you need to build more housing. But from the coalition, that's not enough. That is not going to solve our problems. You do need to have, strong social housing building as well, because that serves an important part of the electorate of the country as well. So for me, those are sort of the ands in this area rather than the ors.
Sick of paying megabucks for your internet? Switching could help you. So switch to Belong Internet. They're backed by Telstra, they have a reliable network, and with internet plans with prices that aren't too spicy. Plus, you can change plans once a month and you're not locked in. For zippy internet at nifty prices, search Belong Internet. It feels good to belong. Climate is obviously a topic that is very important to you.
Yeah.
As a Teal independent. A lot of young people are just looking at their power bills every month, every quarter, saying, how on earth am I supposed to keep up with this? And then you've got one side of politics promising nuclear by 2040,
whoever,
50?
Whenever, I don't know.
The other side, obviously highly committed to renewables.
Yeah.
A lot of people have some fear about whether we can rely on renewables. How would you convince someone who's listening today that we can't rely on renewables for our all of our needs as a nation? What would you say to them?
Look, we absolutely can. It's never only renewables. So, look, climate is really important, but also cost of living is important. And I think we have to find ways that it's not one or the other. Something I've been pushing is energy bills have been really topical, but the problem is we're giving these sort of short-term handouts, but we're not helping people with their energy bills over the long term. I've put forward an energy bill relief package, which is about focus on how do you help households either put solar and batteries in, help renters to have more energy efficient appliances, or also to help solar onto social housing, which could help 800,000 households. And again, I think this is where both the major parties should go. They're partly going there a bit in terms of support of batteries, but not enough. So sorry, but that was kind of a by the by. That's about how do we lower power bills, and that's super important. In terms of the climate transition, we've got the climate transition, but we actually have our own energy system we also need to deal with. And one of the big challenges we have is that over the next 10 10 years, 90% of our coal-fired power stations are going to close. And so we have a question, what do we do about that? And, even if you could ignore, climate change for a moment, but we have to manage this transition. And so, the CSIRO, but also the AEMO and others are saying, the cheapest, most effective way to replace the coal-fired power stations is with renewables, solar and wind, but backed up with storage and backed up with gas for when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. And so it's that combination. It's not just only solar or only wind. It is actually that combination that is both the right job in terms of the cost, but it's also, I think, the right job in terms of being able to do this in the next 10 years. Because I think the alternative is if we wait for nuclear, I've never been anti-nuclear personally. I think, we should look at all technologies. But if we keep coal going until nuclear is ready, which may not be, 2035, may take longer. It's sort of a lot of countries, it does take longer than that. I think the real there's going to be a cost both in terms of our climate, which might be up to 2 billion tonnes, but it's also going to be in terms of our reliability and the cost, because we know that coal and gas, gas in particular, if you try and use gas as sort of a baseload power, it's really expensive. You can see that in your own gas bills right now. Gas is expensive. We're better off with renewables, but using gas only when we need it. You don't need a lot of it, but you do need it when you need it. So that's why I think it's having that mix that is super important.
I think it's really important for our audience to hear your perspectives on all of these things, because come the election, whatever happens, it looks like we're heading for a minority government. So whoever wins is going to win in, shall we say, not enormous fashion. So
I think that's right.
They're going to scrape through, potentially. That's what the polls say at this stage anyway, which means that you and your other colleagues, your other independent colleagues in the Teals could end up becoming incredibly influential and working with either side of politics. So are you willing to work with both leaders, no matter who wins at the election?
Look, I've said that I would, and I mean that sincerely. I do respect the Australian electorate has a strong view on, and it is allowed to, should be listened to, and at the same time, I'm independent, and so I've always said I will work with both, but I won't give up on what I think my community thinks is important. So I think we need to have strong climate action. I think we need to deal with some of the long-term issues that face our economy, particularly how to make sure that our young people can get ahead. And I won't give up on that. I also think we need a kinder society. I know it's not a word you'd throw out very often, but I think it is important that we, in our politics, as we do, I think, in our personal relationships, try and treat each other with decency and try and avoid some of, the sort of culture wars and division that I think can get into politics, which I don't think helps any of us. So those priorities don't go away, but I would work with either side and keep strong on those priorities. And, I'm not afraid to negotiate with anyone, and I've been proud actually in this parliament. I've worked sometimes with the coalition on policies. I've worked to push the government on reducing sort of student debt. And so sometimes I'm a big critic of the government, but sometimes on some climate policies, I've worked constructively with them. So I think that's what at least in my community, people telling me they want me to back any idea if it's a good one, not because one side said it or the other side. And that's really what I'm trying to do at this time.
It's pretty rare these days and refreshing, I think, to hear a politician talking about just increasing kindness in the community. And I'd love to speak to that, because I know you have the Liberal Party in your blood. Your father, your grandfather worked under Robert Menzies, is that right?
Correct.
So you grew up around politics. I grew up around a bit of politics as well. My father was in politics, and I remember as a child seeing his call flutes around the neighbourhood, and I must have been maybe 10 years old or something at the time, and someone had defaced one of them. And it cut you to the core, I can imagine. It crushed me, and I thought, why would anyone want to be in politics? It is so nasty and personal. So what drew you back into the fray?
I think I thought for me it was that last election. I live in an area that has been Liberal forever, apart from sort of 8 months of Karen Phelps. But I just didn't see for me that the Liberal Party was standing for my values, and that is climate action. It is things like business, but it's also about some of those social values. And I think my area where I'm from, it is socially pretty liberal. It is and economic pretty conservative, very business focused, and it cares about the environment. And I think you got to, I feel it's okay to hold those 3 things together and say, I care about all those 3 things. In terms of the kindness piece, what I will say is there's so much joy in politics, Sylvia, so maybe you shouldn't give up on it altogether.
Oh, no, it's not. That's why I did journalism, Allegra.
No, it's people are like, you see people I have had so much joy in my job. It is, and some of it is, I went to a choir the other day for people who have early stage dementia, and they were singing songs. I remember my dad and other people singing to me when I was a kid, and just watching community come together at some difficult times and supporting each other. Like, it's enough to inspire, and warm the cockles of the coldest heart. So there's a lot of joy that comes from it, and also, there's, and I guess that's the piece I feel. That you can both create enormous change and make a real difference to people's lives, and personally can be really fulfilled from it. So I'm very proud to do the work. Like you, I'll be honest though, I didn't think I had the skin or the thick skin to do it, but I just stood up in the end because I was like, look, I just can't stand by. And I thought, well, the worst that can happen is I fail. If people say mean things about me, I know what's important. I know my friends and my family, they care about me, and I've got to kind of come back to that as a protection. I'm sure you get a lot of abuse as a journo. I'm sure you've had that, and you need those good people around you to remind you that that's those people around you, they're the ones who matter to you.
You have a safe harbour.
You have to have a safe harbour. I'm sure it's public life. Like, people are very mean on Twitter. They're much less mean, thankfully, face-to-face. I haven't had a lot of abuse ever face-to-face, but there's a lot online.
That's why I deleted Twitter from my phone.
Yeah,
it's gone.
Sensible. Very sensible.
Much easier to live that way.
Yeah, exactly right.
What about on a personal finance level? I'm not going to ask you for your bank transactions. Don't worry. But, this whole podcast is about our relationship with money and how we relate to it in our everyday life.
Yeah.
And I did wonder, how your mother role modelled personal finance to you as a child, and what lessons she instilled in you.
Yeah, she quite a few actually. So she and her first husband, not my dad, but my brother's dad, they were in business together, and then they split up, and she had to restart her business. And this was in basically 1969. She had a baby under the age of 1. She couldn't get a bank loan because she was a woman. And they thought she'd go and get married again. And what she taught me was that as a woman, you must be financially independent, and that was very strong message for me. And so even today, my husband and I, we have a joint account and we have separate accounts. And I think, that's what I will tell my daughters and my son is, retain your financial independence. It's really, really important. Then my childhood was probably most unusual part of it was that I worked every single school holidays in her business from the age of about 11. So, and because she wanted me to learn the value of hard work. And I remember I started work with her when it was the late 80s and sort of early 90s, a long time ago. And she had a big debt and the bank were almost foreclosed on her. And so, in that time, cash flow was king. I remember every single time we got a check in, from one of the stores or something, we banked it straight away and we watched every single penny. And so I think that sort of discipline of in business was really important for me as a lesson. Always get 2 quotes. On when you're doing things, or 2 or maybe 3 if you can. You can that sometimes something it's not better quality just because it's more expensive. And buy to last. I mean, her clothes I wear, and they last. People come up to me and say, "I've still got the jacket from 10 years ago," and say, "You still look great." Yeah. And so those. Guess some of the lessons I learnt with Mum. Is you need to work hard. It's not easy to get ahead, but and I think and you have to be pretty conscious of it. And but I'm really lucky. I think I had those examples. How about your mum? Did she give you some good ones?
Well, always live within your means.
Yeah, I think that's a great one.
That was what Mum always drilled into us.
Yeah. Exactly.
And she modelled that every single day to us. And it wasn't always easy. I know it wasn't. And she probably tried to hide it a lot more than we knew. But she never had a credit card.
Yeah.
She had a mortgage on the house, but she, you know, chipped away at it. And you know, we were tight. We didn't have huge luxuries. Yeah. But on top of that, it was education, opportunity. And she made me throw my hat in the ring for absolutely everything, no matter whether I thought I was going to get it or not.
Yeah, good on her.
So she saw opportunity as a richness.
Yeah, and I think my mum was the same. She would say, I only regretted the things I didn't do. Yeah. You know, and she was grateful to this country for the opportunities it gave her. That she was very proud to be, you know, Italian, but she was very proud to be Australian. And she just thought this was the best country in the world because of opportunities it gives people.
My mum actually encouraged me to throw my hat in the ring for the auto cue rolling job at Channel 9 in Brisbane 20 years ago when I was 19. That's how I got my job at Channel 9.
Yeah, that's it.
And then the first time I was called to Sydney to come and fill in on the weekend today, which was a big moment for me, I wore a Carla Zampatti suit.
Beautiful.
So there you go.
My mum would have been delighted to hear that. Mum loved when her clothes were with you on big moments. Yeah. Like, that was her big thing. For she wanted women to feel confident. And that was about, you know, because if you feel confident in how you look, you sort of don't worry about it and you go into the world and your big moments. And I think that's so, so important.
Yeah, she was an amazing woman.
Oh, she was amazing. It sounds like your mum's pretty special, I have to say.
She's very special, Janine.
Yeah.
She'll love hearing this. Okay. She'll love it. So look, if we can finish off, I suppose, with a message to young voters before they head to the polls, what do you want them to keep front of mind as they're casting their vote at this election?
That's a really good question. So I think get informed. Actually, I think it's really important. Your vote matters. That's more than anything. You know, find out what's important, what people are standing for, and get informed. Because there's this great quote from Plato, which, you know, a philosopher who lived thousands of years ago, which I'm about to butcher, and it said, those who are disinterested in politics are going to be governed by their inferiors, which I thought was very funny. But it's basically, if you don't get informed, you won't have a say, and you actually can make a difference. So get informed. Secondly, I think look at the long term, because I think there's lots of short term policies, and you know, my frustration, is that I think we're not dealing with some of the bigger long term issues. So I think try and look at the long term concerns. Climate is obviously one of them, but absolutely the economy and the opportunity for young people coming forward is really important. So I think those are super important. And then finally also, there's a lot of fear out there right now. And I think fear is difficult to counter. But I think that we need to also focus on, Australia, we can't be fearful. We need to be hopeful, and we need to, stick true to our values rather than sort of, work from a basis of fear. But I'd say get informed. I try and read lots of different views. So don't just don't try and get in your echo chamber of just one source of news. Look at what different people and different people are saying across different types of news outlets, because that might give you a more rounded perspective on what people think. And look for independent voices. I think you're obviously providing them, but also look at think tanks, all those sorts of things. People can give you some independent voices as well.
As much as we want everyone to listen to the payoff, we want them to digest a broad range of media heading into this election.
It's brilliant that if they listen to this, because you've got a range of people's voices on here, and that's great. Like, listen to people and hear the case they're making.
Well, we are truly grateful to have your voice on here today.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much, Allegra, for joining us.
It's been an absolute delight.